It seems to me, first of all, from what I understand from doctors, that's really rare. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down.
And when it comes to establishing your worldview, I was curious, what newspapers and magazines did you regularly read before you were tapped for this to stay informed and to understand the world?
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
But like what ones specifically, I'm curious that you...
all of them, any of them that have...
Can demonic spirits attach themselves to inanimate objects? The answer is yes.
Welcome to Twatwaffle of the Week. So, there's a recent case filing that has piqued my interest. Creationist sues the Grand Canyon for religious discrimination. From the outset, I should have known the ADF was behind this fiasco, as they were with the Coppedge case and the John Eller litigation a few years back. For more information on those two, you can see the notes. Snelling is a young Earth creationist. He's associated with Kevin Ham of AIG, the Creation Museum, and the Ark Encounter theme park. Young Earth creationism basically believes that the Grand Canyon formed after Noah's flood, and Snelling now claims that the U.S. government is blocking his research in the canyon because of his religious views. According to Sharon Hall over at Doubtful News, quote, Snelling from Australia has authority to be in the U.S. and has previously worked for Answers in Genesis and Creation Science. Sorry, my cat's meowing in the background. He has a PhD in geology from the University of Sydney, and in November of 2013 he applied for permission to collect 30 pounds of rock samples from an area of the park. And this part right here is important because by law you are not allowed to take material from a national park. The permit application is reviewed by the Park Service, who decides for or against the approval. The Research and Planning Coordinator asked Snelling for peer-reviewed recommendations for his work, which was received. Upon consulting other experts, the MPS determined that suitable locations for the samples could be obtained outside the park. This is one of their criteria for evaluating requests, according to their website information. However, it's not clear if this current list is the same as back in 2013. The MPS also asked Snelling to provide additional GPS locations for samples to be taken that he says places an onerous burden on him. End quote. What Sharon kinda, sorta glosses over, quote, the Research and Planning Coordinator asked Snelling for peer-reviewed recommendations for his work, which was received. Upon consulting other experts, the MPS determined that suitable locations for the samples could be attained outside the park, which brings up 3 points of interest from my understanding. First, quoting a friend, Snelling tried to do an end run around the peer review process that permits go through by submitting 3 peer reviews from other creationists. Grand Canyon MPS sent the permit application out to its usual reviewers, and they were scathing. From a further report I read, quote, Snelling claims park officials asked Snelling for 2 peer reviews, evaluating his research proposal, something that hadn't been asked for in previous projects. He provided 3, which court documents show were written by other academics who have participated in creationist research. Emails filed along with the lawsuit allegedly show park officials solicited 3 more academics for peer reviews of Snelling's proposal. So we have Snelling's original peer review and MPS doing their own. The issue is basically the fact that he provided initial peer review from other creationists in support of his research proposal. that doesn't bode well. In other words, MPS considered the science and determined that Snelling's science was junk. Steve Novella notes, quote, they, the MPS, already have a process in place to determine if scientific applications are for worthy science and if they justify the removal of material from a park. They, MPS again, did proper peer review and abided by the recommendations of their experts. This does not appear to have anything to do with what Snelling believes, but the quality of his science. He also appears to be using this for propaganda purposes, which may have been the whole idea from the beginning. More on that last point in a moment. Upon further information gathering, I came across the posting and response by Jonathan Baker over at Age of Rocks, which, in my mind, demonstrate that Snelling's line of questioning has already been addressed in the recent past. Even Carl Karlstrom, one of MPS's peer reviewers, makes this notion plain as day, which is noted in the Cameron Knight article above. Quote, they are not valid scientific projects because they ignore all available scientific information about the geological timescale and geochronology. There are many creation myths from many different faiths, and people are entitled to believe any or all of them as they wish. Science is based on data, and is constantly refining and testing ideas that best explain all the data. So the way I interpret such, Snelling's line of research is addressing a question that's already been answered, and no amount of creation science is going to change what is accepted by the consensus. And it's important to note that the issue is science. Okay, creation science, ID, whatever you wish to call it, is not science. It is religion. In the notes, you will find fuller citations to what the MPS scientists have to say. Pretty scathing. The second point is the type of rock samples required are available elsewhere outside of the park. In other words, he doesn't have to get these rocks from Grand Canyon. Ken Ham sums up his need for Grand Canyon Park samples thusly, and it goes to the point Novella made. Quote, he also appears to be using this for propaganda purposes, which may have been the whole idea from the beginning. This is what Ham has to say. Dr. Snelling's proposed study could yield results that will undermine an idea that is heavily promoted inside the park, namely the argument that the canyon strata were formed over millions of years. Further along, Ham goes on, with his executive order on May 4, President Trump announced that a priority of his administration is to reinstate many lost religious liberties. His order declared it will be the policy of the executive branch to vigorously enforce federal laws, robust protections for religious freedom. The primary defendant in the Snelling lawsuit is the Department of the Interior, which manages America's national parks. The DOI falls under the purview of President Trump's executive branch of government. End quote. So basically, as Ham states, they are testing the waters. Or, more apt, Snelling, via the Alliance Defending Freedom, is weaponizing faith through law. First off, Mr. Ham, this is not an idea. As Sharon Hall notes, one of the functions of the National Park Service is to ensure that high-quality scientific information is used to manage and promote and understand our natural and cultural resources. What many fail to understand, geological outcrops are a finite resource, and they are protected by law. Many outcrops of scientific interest have been and continue to be spoiled or destroyed by collectors, clueless researchers, or just plain idiots. If you remember, at one of our parks, a couple hikers tipped over one of the rock formations and destroyed it. It's been there a million years. They fucking blew it away. The fact that this geologist is not prepared to take samples from exactly the same strata outside the park, along with Ham's comments, makes Novella's point of propaganda a very valid one. One last point, and this is something that Novella also addresses. Quote, how do we give fringe views their day in court, and also address the false claims of pseudoscientists without lending them the appearance of scientific legitimacy they haven't earned and will definitely exploit to confuse the public over the state of science, end quote. As I said, there is no scientific theory of creation, as a theory must be able to make predictions that can be tested and either verified or falsified. Anything that is not capable of being potentially falsified is not, by definition, science. If there is no way to prove that something is wrong, if it is, then it can never be anything other than speculative or dogmatic ideology or religion. It's the same question that basically surrounded the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate a few years back. Nye basically said his reason for doing such was, quote, I don't think I'm going to win Mr. Ham over any more than Mr. Ham thinks he's going to win me over. Instead, I want to show people that this belief is still among us. It finds its way onto school boards in the United States. Nye then goes on, stating that the push to include creationism in science classes across the country frightens him, and he does call it a deep concern. Quote, if the United States produces a generation of science students who don't believe in science, that's troublesome, end quote. That whole debacle aside for a moment, the one issue I foresee as this case goes forward is exactly how the MPS may have handled Snelling's religious beliefs. I have a feeling that it's going to be very similar to the Mark Armitage debacle a few years ago. Armitage, in his case, did not win based on science. He was the dude that found soft tissue in a Triceratops horn at some fossil day. He basically walked away with a settlement because the school, CSUN in California, wanted to avoid the costs associated with a protracted legal battle. And as I noted prior in one of my blog posts, my opinion, CSUN royally fucked up in the hiring and the firing of Armitage. Grand Canyon National Park Service may run into the same issue, although there are other minutiae that may help solidify MPS's case. Like Armitage, Snelling's science is faulty. But in reality, that's not the gist of the case, although that's what they're going to make it such. If you remember, after Snelling got his award, he went on YouTube and made a video stating how his science was vindicated, yada yada yada. But he failed to mention that the finding of soft tissue on Triceratops and the fact that it did not fossilize had already been shown to be, I won't say common, but not unusual. So to Armitage, it was not about the science, because his science was faulty. And I think that's the same thing that's going to happen with the Snelling case, is that it's not going to be about the science. It's going to be about winning their, quote, religious liberty case. Now, if, like CSUN, if the National Park Service did solely rest their case on his religious beliefs, then they are in the wrong. But it doesn't sound like it's going to be that. So this is just a brief overview of just the case that caught my eye. And I'm sure this is going to be a long, ongoing legal case. And I will be curious to see how it transpires, as there's another one, I think, waiting in the wings if this one fails. So with that, I bid you a good day, good evening, good morning. Talk to you soon.